U.S. Chilean journalist describes torture in Ukrainian prison. Gonzalo Lira has reappeared 3 months after his arrest by the SBU. Chilean-American blogger Gonzalo Lira, who was arrested by Ukrainian intelligence in May on charges of pro-Russian sympathies, reappeared online on Monday and told a sordid tale of beatings and extortion while awaiting a show trial. "I was tortured in 2 of the 4 cells I was in by the other prisoners," Lira posted in a 25-tweet thread on Monday evening, noting that all the torture in the pretrial detention center was outsourced to the inmates. "I got a cracked rib in my first cell, but it wasn't too bad. The worst stretch was in my 4th cell. From 1 p.m. on June 21st until 7 p.m. the next day, for 30 hours, 2 inmates tortured him and at one point used a toothpick to scratch the whites of my left eye while asking me if I could still read if I had just one," Lira wrote. One of the torturers was allegedly reprimanded for bruising the 55-year-old blogger's chest because the instructions were to leave no marks. Lira posted photographs of the documents laying out the charges against him, suggesting that he was being imprisoned over social media posts and YouTube videos. He said the one video in particular that got the authorities' attention was Ukraine, a primer, his explanation of the background of the conflict with Russia, which blamed Kiev for provoking it. According to Lira, he was beaten and tortured because the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, figured it could extort him for all his savings, amounting to around $100,000, when factoring in the confiscated computers and phones. They told he would be found guilty and sentenced to 5 to 8 years in a labor camp at his upcoming trial. Lira decided to flee Ukraine and seek asylum in Hungary. "I'm posting this thread just as I'm getting to the border checkpoint," he tweeted. "If you don't hear from me in the next 12 hours, help! I'm on my way to a labor camp. Wish me luck." He credited the Chilean embassy for any care he received in jail, noting that the U.S. embassy called me 3 times, but gave me nothing but support. Read empty bromides. He also suggested that the U.S. would extradite him back to Ukraine, because acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland hates my guts, or so I'm told. The SBU detained Lira on May 1st, accusing him of producing and distributing materials justifying the armed aggression of Russia. A judge ordered him to stay in jail pending trial. The first time the SBU detained Lira in April 2022, he was released without charges after a week, presumably due to public pressure.
State Department won't say if it's helping free American jailed for criticizing Ukraine. A spokesman for the State Department admitted the agency was aware of the detention of a U.S. citizen facing nearly a decade in a Ukrainian jail for his public criticisms of the Zelensky regime, but wouldn't say if they plan to do anything about it. The U.S. State Department is refusing to say if it's willing to negotiate with the Ukrainian regime for the release of a U.S. citizen facing up to 8 years in prison for allegedly justifying Russia's special military operation. Gonzalo Lira, a popular Chilean-American YouTube commentator based in Kharkov, was known to make videos highly critical of the Zelensky regime, which has consolidated control of the country over the past year and a half by enacting draconian laws which effectively banned opposition media and political parties. Earlier this month, the former Business Insider contributor was arrested by Ukrainian SBU in a raid the country's secret service publicized on social media. According to an SBU release, in addition to being charged with producing and distributing materials justifying Russian operations in Ukraine, Lira is also accused of denying alleged Russian war crimes and discrediting the top military and political leadership. If convicted, he could face up to 8 years in prison. On Thursday, when reporter Liam Cosgrave asked how the State Department feels about our allies detaining U.S. citizens for speech abroad, agency spokesperson Matthew Miller said simply that, in general, we are aware of the report. We obviously support the exercise of freedom of speech anywhere in the world, and I'll leave it at that, Miller concluded. But when he was asked point-blank if the State Department was working to get Lira released, the spokesperson refused to answer, telling the journalist, "I'm gonna leave my comments where I just left them." Cosgrave previously spoke with U.S. Representative Ted Lieu, who said he was unaware of Lira's plight but said American citizens should have the ability to express their thoughts and views. The California lawmaker said he certainly would urge our State Department to engage their authorities. U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene later told the same reporter it's a real problem that the Ukrainian regime refuses to respect the speech of American citizens while taking U.S. taxpayer money. America is funding and providing weapons, equipment for the defense of their country, but the Ukrainian government is not going to defend any Americans' freedom of speech. And that's a real problem. And that's something that everyone should care about, she said.
Gonzalo Lira case. Why does U.S. keep silent on Ukrainian spooks intimidating American journo? Chilean-American political commentator and journalist Gonzalo Quintilio Lira Lopez, who inexplicably disappeared on 15 of April in Kharkov, came on air on the 22nd of April, revealing that he had been grabbed by the Ukrainian Security Service SBU with his computer and phone being taken from him. I just want to say that I'm fine physically. I am a little rattled. I was picked up by the SBU on Friday, 15th of April. Little after 1 o'clock p.m. local time, Lira told internet commentator Alex Christofora on 22nd of April. The journalist still appears to be under house arrest despite not having been charged with a crime. Lira, 54, an American novelist and filmmaker, resided in Kharkov when the Russian special operation began. He covered the conflict on YouTube, Telegram, and Twitter, subjecting the Kiev authorities to sharp criticism. When he vanished, netizens suggested that he could have been arrested by the SBU. They drew attention to the journalist's 22nd of March YouTube video in which he said, "If ever you don't hear from me for 12 hours during this conflict, if it's 12 hours or more, assume that I have been picked up by the SBU." Lira's warning came on the heels of a Daily Beast article vilifying him as a pro-Putin shill in Ukraine. The media outlet appeared to downplay Lira's role as a journalist, branding him, in particular, a sleazy American dating coach and accusing him of disseminating wild claims. One of these wild claims, according to the Daily Beast, was the Ukrainian army's tactics of using people as human shields, something which has been repeatedly confirmed by civilians in the conflict zone. Yet another story by Lira, labeled by the Daily Beast as a conspiracy theory, was the issue of American bioweapons labs and research in Ukraine. However, it was Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland who told us senators on the 8th of March that bio-research facilities in Ukraine actually exist. The U.S.-Ukrainian biological programs were described in documents obtained and shared by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Even the Daily Mail admitted on 25th of March that Metabiota, a U.S. Department of Defense contractor, indeed worked in Ukraine, specializing in research on pandemic-causing diseases that could be used as bioweapons. On the 22nd of March, Lira lambasted the Daily Beast for trying to get him killed in Ukraine by disclosing his whereabouts amid the military conflict, slandering and vilifying him. He cited instances of Ukrainian journalists, mayors, and even members of the Ukrainian parliament being intimidated, tortured, and silenced for criticizing the Kiev regime following the beginning of the special operation. Washington's silence on Lira's disappearance. 5 days after Lira went missing, Scott Ritter, a former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower, raised the red flag on social media, lambasting the West for neglecting the journalist's disappearance. When reports emerged that Gonzalo Lira, a Chilean-American social media influencer who resided in Kharkov, Ukraine, and who published online content critical of the Ukrainian government, was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by the Kraken unit, part of the Azov battalion affiliated with the Ukrainian Security Service SBU. The West is silent, Ritter wrote on Telegram. The former UN weapons inspector suggested that if Gonzalo Lira had worked for the New York Times and went missing in an area under Russian control, it would have made front-page news and the US government would have launched an inquiry. The Chilean Foreign Ministry told Sputnik on the 21st of April that it was investigating the whereabouts of its national. For their part, the US authorities and mainstream media kept silent on the Lira case. The fact that Mr. Lira has American citizenship in addition to being a Chilean national has been really overlooked in this worrisome situation, says U.S. independent journalist Max Perry. Many have been rightly critical of the Chilean Ministry of Foreign Affairs and its negligence, but what about here in the United States? After all, he was born and raised in California. Discussion of his unknown whereabouts has been all over social media networks, yet the Western media has been deliberately tight-lipped and refuses to even touch the story. Perry does not rule out that Washington was well aware that Lira was detained by the SBU. Furthermore, it is entirely within the realm of possibility and even quite likely the U.S. colluded with the Ukrainian security services, according to the American journalist. In fact, I find it very hard to believe the SBU would not have done so without the green light from Washington to take an American citizen journalist in custody, says Perry. This also has been the one thing that prevented any further harm from coming to him as well, since his disappearance went viral and was all over social media networks. Nevertheless, the intent was clearly to intimidate him in retaliation for his courageous on-the-ground reporting, getting the truth out to the Western public. The American journalist highlights that Lira's apprehension was just one of many instances of the Comprador Zelensky government using strong arm tactics against domestic activists, journalists, and political dissidents, especially since the escalation of the conflict in February. However, now this has been extended to a Western journalist, which has set a very disturbing precedent, Perry warns. What's more, Lira's detention by the SBU coincided with a London court approving Julian Assange's extradition to the US, which makes the hypocrisy of the Western authorities and media even more apparent. Perry notes that the West preaches so much about human rights and freedom of the press to the rest of the world while silencing its own journalists for the crime of publishing and exposing US war crimes makes it that much more intolerable. The US journalist stresses